So what we're going to answer is, what are independent activities? Now, independent activities are, of course, have to be independent. But there's a lot of intricate things to them that's important to understand before you get involved. If you're able to, or if you're already involved in doing independent activities, then let's brainstorm together what it is that they actually do and how it is that they actually are, and we'll go through that topic. So the independent activity is the doing exercise. It's the doing aspect of the work. It's not the being aspect of the work. This is the involvement of the doing. So you want to work or look at the work of acting. So basically in the way that the, you could say Meisner set up, in terms of originally these things were called the ins and the outs. There was a person inside the door and there was a person outside the door. And there's a person inside doing and there's a person outside. So when we're looking at this, we want to look at this work so that you've got the independent activity as an involvement, a doing. And you've got the outside of the door, a being. Somebody's out the door in a state of being. So they're at an emotional state of being, or they're just at a state of existence, which is the way that the independent activities actually start, depending upon the school. But most of the independent activities start with simply being able to achieve an independent activity, or being able to achieve a focused concentration, or a doing. Now, what type of doing? Initially, the independent activity is any kind of focused thing. So it would be cutting something in a certain shape, or punch carting something out and assembling something. Or the independent activity has to have some kind of involvement. It has to have some kind of doing, and it has to have some sort of result. So there's a purpose towards it. And before I forget, which I never do, but the reality of it, it has to be motivated. Everyone leaves out the motivation, or many people do, not everyone. A lot of people, a lot of different teachers leave out the motivation quality of the independent activity. But it's of one of the highest importances, because you've got to be motivated to get it done. So even when you're starting out at the very, 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 very beginning, you want to be able to achieve an independent activity, or a doing, or I'll call it the doing exercise, because this is really the element of involvement. You're involved in doing something. And you've got to have a criteria to be able to get that achieved. And that includes motivation. So you have a person outside the door. And this is the outside-inside work. So you've got initially the initial independent activity is nothing having to do with anybody other than yourself getting something done. Then you start adding the layers of the work. And once the teacher can see that the person's able to do an actual independent activity with no distractions, and they're able to concentrate to get something achieved, then they usually put somebody around them in their, maybe within their 10-foot radius, and then they do repetition back and forth, and then they work themselves into being able to do the independent activity with the repetition. And this is a good start. It's a good start to be able to learn how to act, or at least be able to refamiliarize yourself how to act. Because there's a lot of times people will go through these works, this element of these works, and they'll realize that there was things that they wish they had have known the first time around when they did the work, and they're not quite sure how to go back and reapproach the work to be able to incorporate those things. So that's part of the purpose of what I'm doing right now, is because I want people to be able to be familiar with some of the basics and even more intricate things, but mostly basics. And then on some levels, there's stuff that I know that everyone's forgetting that needs reminders of, so I'm including that. So the independent activity is something that remains an independent doing unless it's justified, because a lot of times things will happen where there's a justification, and if it's a natural justification, then the exercise can go anywhere. But at the point of what an independent activity actually is it's an isolated situation. It's an isolated independent activity. But this is the reason why when the work progresses, what ends up happening is that the person goes from being outside 10 feet, and then you start adding layers to the work. So then you start putting them outside of a door. And so you've got somebody that's now involved in a doing exercise, and you have somebody that's involved in a being exercise. They're in an emotional state of being outside of the door, and they're in a potentially an emotional state of being because they're involved in an independent activity on the inside of the door. And then from there, all the different levels and layers of the work build up according to what the teacher is suggesting that the student can handle. And I've watched people that are top people in the industry, as well as people that are brand new. Some people that have had, children of famous people. It doesn't make any difference to me. But the thing is that what I'm interested in is the technique. So I've seen all types of people, all kinds of walks of life, and I've seen all types of class status. Regardless, it could be people that are very artistic, it could be people that are very logical. And I've watched every single spectrum of humanity try and do this exercise. And I've seen a heck of a lot of them, more than most teachers have by a long shot. Or at least, usually, it depends on how long the teacher's been studying, of course. So, to answer what is an independent activity, the independent activity is the independent doing that happens in an acting exercise. And once they're able to start the independent activity, they've got to have motivation to do it, which is left out in the classes a lot of times. And they've got to be able to get it done. So you've got to be able to achieve it. It's got to be practical enough to be able to achieve. And you've got to be able to want to do it. Now, every single thing that happens in the work from the very beginning all the way up to the advanced levels, and you even use independent activities in Spoon River anthologies, if you're that advanced with the exercise. Now, one thing to understand about being advanced in acting, there's a lot of very interesting things that are very advanced, but that doesn't mean the acting's any good. So on a technical level, it might be extremely advanced, but it doesn't mean that that there's going to be an audience for it, or it doesn't mean that there is. It doesn't mean a lot of things. I mean, a technique is a technique, and the element of this independent activity continues throughout all the different progressions of acting. And the difficulty of the independent activity is then added to the work at a certain level. And this is at the earlier stages. And that earlier on level of adding a difficulty or making sure that the independent activity is difficult is the flexibility of involvement. So when you're doing scenes, which everyone wants to know about, how do you do a scene and how do you involve scenes in acting? Well, you want to involve independent activities in your scene work. It's not cliche if it's done authentically. But the thing is, if you don't do it authentically, then it becomes cliche. So the biggest problem with the independent activities, is the fact that everyone sits there and says, well, this is a coffee cup. We're not going to have any coffee in it. Or we're going to sit there and pretend like we're doing an activity. That's not the independent activities. It's not about rushing to get something done and looking like you're busy. The reality of independent activities is involvement. That is, you're trying to concentrate. You're trying to expand your concentration. And the exercise in acting, whether you call it in and out, if you call it doors activities, whether you call it independent activities, if you call it the doing exercise and the being exercise, regardless, you have to have, it's not about trying to go in as somebody who's in a state of being and distract somebody else or annoy somebody else intentionally. So the element that we are providing to the creative field that we're in as actors has to be able to give a platform of levelness so that we're level enough with everything that we're doing that a creative adjustment could be made and it would make a difference. What does that mean? If I'm doing an independent activity here, I need to be able to be concentrated enough, focused enough, able to achieve that activity. I'm not trying to skirt any issues. I'm not trying to be in a situation where the work in acting is getting missed. I'm in a situation where I'm doing that independent activity, where my focus and concentration is needed in order to get it done. When my focus and concentration is needed to get something done, that is the state of being that I'm in. And then later on, we add emotional states. We add different elements to it because we're able to achieve craft to be able to add maybe some inclinations, feelings, or different things. And then ultimately what we want to do is we want to be able to add emotional preparation, which is the emotional self-stimulation of yourself, where you bring internal emotion, external. So, for instance, it's a great example, and I've seen this, and it's a very good example. You have somebody that's preparing to write a eulogy, and they're writing a eulogy, and their lover has just passed away, and their best friend comes over. Now, this isn't a beginning exercise, but I've seen it done very well by beginners that didn't know that this wasn't a beginning exercise, and they did it in the beginning class. Now, do I recommend them doing it? No, I wouldn't recommend it, but I would tell you they did it very well. So, you have somebody that's involved in a doing that's affected on the progress of them getting that done. So this is another key point. A key point is that they're affected by whether or not they have the independent activity get done. So they're not coming along glib. They're not glibly trying to do an activity to be able to distract themselves so they can then do some funny thing or not do some funny thing and have really boring acting. They're not trying to entertain people. Entertainment of people comes from involvement, real entertainment. And real entertainment comes from the ability to be able to have people be able to follow your concentrated thought and follow your emotional life and follow your emotions and live your emotions with you as you're living them. That's real entertainment. That's the nonchalance of entertainment. It's exactly what it is. That's what it's meant to be. So when you've got a situation where you have a eulogy that you have to write, you're in a state of affectedness. You're getting affected because, first of all, you have to write it, and you have to face the people that you have to face, and you have somebody that's deceased that you really care about. And then what happens is there's an unexpected knock at the door. It is not an independent activity where you're expecting somebody to get a knock on the door and all you know is that you need to concentrate for 2 minutes, and then all of a sudden somebody will knock at the door, and then it's just a matter of trying to escape being in an acting exercise or going back and forth repeating. You want the independent activity to be concentrating, where you want to get it done, and really that there's an impetus that you really need to get it done. But you want to have a motivation to get it done beyond the need. Like, for instance, want to leave a good impression at a funeral for my ex-fiancée or my ex lover who I was going to be married to, and she died in a car accident one night. At least we're not sure, but that's what we think, that it was a car accident. There's some circumstances I'm not sure. Now, if that's the storyline, and it's not the greatest, but it's something, then my desire and motivation for that is that I want to leave a good impression. There'll be people that I probably haven't met. Maybe I know a lot of them. Maybe I know all of them. But my motivation is I want to leave a good impression for the eulogy people, with the people that come. If I leave out motivation, I may not have my activity done. I don't have that connected unless I have the motivation. And that's the teaching point. So, when a person unexpectedly knocks at the door, it should startle you, genuinely. It shouldn't be an independent activity that you turn around and say, oh, well, that's great. Oh, it's time to answer the door now. Let's go. That's not what it is. All of the uncertainty about whether or not you're going to be able to get this independent activity done, involved in your doing, has to be in the surprise moment of you not knowing who's knocking on the door. The unanticipated knock. It's never the anticipated knock, unless it's in a scene and it's written like that and you've got somebody coming over. It's unanticipated. So, as truthful as everybody wants to go after truth, you've got to connect the technicalities to be able to make the truth connect. If you didn't connect the eulogy to a past lover that died in mysterious circumstances, and having to go and do a eulogy and a speech for them at their gravesite, then you're not doing the work of acting, because you as the creator and you as the actor have set up that crafted circumstance. And whether the person at the other side of the door or not, or a distraction, or a knock at the door, unexpected knock, comes or doesn't come, the reality is that you set the focus of the entire exercise up based off the independent activity. That is the entire acting element that is a part of that connection. So you're connected to the entire acting element. Connecting this and knowing that it has to be connected, you could even go and ask yourself at the end of the work, did you do a good job? How much of a surprise did you feel when her best friend shows up and says, we found out that she didn't die in a car accident. What would that do to you? I have no idea. But I know that if you're focused on the independent activity and you've got the independent activity done and you know that there's a result that needs to happen, otherwise you're going to lose your motivation, and you've added the motivation because you don't want to let people down, and all of a sudden you have somebody knocking at the door that you didn't expect and you feel the surprise of it, now you're actually starting to do a thing called acting. This is actually what acting is. And this is actually what an independent activity actually does. And then when you're at the door and getting a surprise news, you just respond truthfully. And then all of these moments will happen in your work. Moments that you didn't expect to happen. And moments that you might not even fully be able to recognize or remember. Now, that would be a good thing. Because you want to be able to be so involved in what you're doing that you don't have full recollection of it. You'll have some recollection of it, but you can't expect yourself to know, if you're working at a deep emotional level, to remember every nuance. But you can expect yourself to be awake, you can be alert, you can still be responsive with the meaning and with the emotion and with the purpose of that independent activity. And it would go the same way. Let's do one more example. You have an independent activity, and it's building up a little musical instrument out of like cardboard and wood. It looks really, really, really nice. It's a phonophone or something like that, where you can play records on it, and it had the old big tubes. And it's about this tall.